Have you ever asked God to lead you while quietly hoping that He will lead you exactly where you've already decided you would like to go? Lord, you take the lead, but preferably in this direction, at this speed, with these people. And if possible, could you just avoid that particular campsite altogether? Because I really don't want to camp next to Isaskar. We say we want God at the center of our lives, but then we want to choose the position, choose the people around us, choose the timing, choose the route, and obviously reserve the right to move tents if somebody else seems to have a better view. And then I read Numbers 2, a chapter I could very easily have skimmed because at first glance it looks like God is giving Israel camping instructions. Who pitches their tent where? Who camps next to whom? Who leads which tribe? How many people are in each group? Who moves first? And I suddenly realized this isn't random at all. There's a picture here of how the people of God move through the wilderness, and perhaps a picture of how you and I are meant to move through life. God in the center, Jesus out front, and us learning to stay faithfully where God has positioned us. But before I get ahead of myself, let me welcome you into the Jules for Jesus podcast, or as a colleague said earlier this week, perhaps the Jesus for Jules podcast, because Jesus is always for us, and my, how true is that? Anyway, I'm Jules, and this is where we take our faith seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously, because if we did, some of us would have to admit that we are perfectly happy for God to be in control, as long as He doesn't interfere too much with our own little patch of grass. So go and get your tent pegs, sleeping bag, bring the family, bring the dog, because today, my friend, we are going camping. And our campsite is Numbers chapter 2. So the Israelites are moving through the wilderness. They don't have permanent homes. Every time the camp moves, everything moves. Families, children, livestock, possessions. And right there in the middle of this enormous moving community is the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. Under the Old Covenant, the tabernacle represented God's dwelling presence among His people. This was a sacred space. The priesthood served there, sacrifices were offered there, and the most holy place was at its heart. So when Israel moved, the tabernacle moved. When Israel stopped, the tabernacle was set up again. God's presence wasn't an optional extra somewhere on the edge of the camp. God was at the center of it. And then God tells Moses and Aaron how everybody else must position themselves. Numbers 2 says, the Israelites are to camp around the tent of meeting, some distance from it, each of them under their standard and holding the banners of their family. Think about that picture. Tabernacle in the middle, then the Levites around it, then the tribes of Israel arranged around them, east, south, west, and north. 3 tribes grouped together on each side. Standards, banners, leaders, divisions, numbers, positions, even the order in which they were to move. God is extraordinarily specific. And perhaps the first thing Numbers 2 tells us is something we so easily forget. God knows exactly where His people are. He knows how many there are. He knows their names. He knows their families. He appoints leaders. He directs where they should be positioned. God is in the detail. And I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly comforting. Because sometimes life feels anything but ordered. We see fragments. God sees the whole camp from above and from within. We see today. God sees where we have been, where we are, who's walking beside us, and where He's taking us next. Numbers 2 doesn't read like a God who's only interested in the big picture. He's naming leaders, counting people, assigning positions, giving the order of departure. And imagine for a moment if He hadn't. Imagine this enormous number of people arriving somewhere in the wilderness and everybody simply choosing their own campsite. Absolute chaos. I want east. No, I was here first. Our family always camps near Judah. Why does Reuben get that spot? I don't like the Zebulun people. Can somebody please move that camel? There's a reason armies don't go into battle with everybody wandering around wherever they feel most comfortable. And there's something distinctly military about Numbers 2. Divisions, standards, leadership, formation, and order of movement, unity. This is a people who will face enemies, battles, and opposition. And God is teaching them how to move as one people. But at the heart of that formation is not a commander's tent or a human leader. It's the presence of God. The tribes had different standards, different family identities, different positions, different leaders. But every one of those tribes was arranged around the same center, the presence of God. And I think there's something so important for us in that. We also have things that identify us in this world: our surname, our family, our career, our qualifications, where we come from, things we have achieved. But none of those things should become the center around which our lives are organized. God belongs there. Identity may include many things, but ultimately the most important thing about us is whose we are. And that becomes even more significant when we look at the family banners in Numbers 2. Numbers says that the people camped under their standards and with the banners of their families. They weren't simply isolated individuals scattered through the wilderness. They belonged to families. They belonged to tribes. They belonged to a community. And that made me think, what banner are we carrying for our families? And I don't mean the family crest. I don't mean the silver tea set that has been passed down since 1843 and nobody's allowed to touch. I mean the spiritual banner. If God has entrusted people to you, children, grandchildren, people you influence, people who look to you, what are they learning from the way you live? Do they see somebody desperately protecting an earthly reputation? Or somebody only living for their own pleasure without much regard for the effect it has on others? Or do they see somebody who keeps bringing life back into order around the presence of God? Because family unity doesn't mean everybody in the family will always agree. Unity doesn't even mean pretending everything is okay when it isn't. Sometimes loving somebody means speaking truth. Sometimes it means praying. Sometimes it means correcting. Sometimes it means refusing to join the chaos. But it does mean remembering these are the people God has entrusted to me to love. I don't own them. I can't choose Jesus for them. But I can make sure that as far as it depends on me, Jesus is clearly visible from my tent. And then Numbers 2 gives us another detail. On the eastern side of the tabernacle is the camp of Judah. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun camped together. And the leader of Judah is a man named Nahshon, son of Amminadab. The whole camp of Judah numbers 186,400 men. And then God says something simple. They will set out first. Judah goes first. And when I followed that name Nahshon through scripture, something beautiful stood out to me, because Nahshon isn't just a random name. Go forward through the genealogy and you will find Abinadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, and eventually through David's line, Jesus. Matthew places Nahshon right there in the genealogy of Christ. Now I know this is an Old Testament detail, but it certainly made me stop and consider the picture it gives for my own life. The presence of God at the center, and Judah, the tribe through which Jesus would eventually come, setting out first. And I thought, that is how I want to move through life. God in the center, Jesus goes first. Not Jules first, and Jesus, please follow along and bless whatever Jules has already decided. No, Jesus first. Before the email, before the decision, before the reaction, before the relationship, before the ambition, before the worry, before the thing I am desperately trying to fix. Jesus, you go first. And maybe that's a good question for us today. Who is actually marching out first in your life? Who do you allow or ask to take the lead in the morning before you get out of bed? Because it's very easy to say Jesus comes first while quietly organizing your entire life around something else. Sometimes I march out first. My plans, my comfort, my reputation, what people think of me, my work, my finances, what I think should happen next. And sometimes, especially as parents, we can even allow our children to take the central place. Their happiness becomes the organizing principles of the family. Their achievements consume us. Their preferences dictate everything. But our children should not be the center of the family. They need to know who is. They need parents who love them deeply enough to show them, in this family, Jesus leads. We don't always get it right. We don't pretend to be perfect. But when things become disordered, we know where to return. And then there's another little detail in Numbers that I love. People are repeatedly identified through their fathers. Nahshon, son of Abinadab. Nethanel, son of Zuar. Eliab, son of Helon. Their fathers formed part of their identification. And it made me ask myself, is my heavenly Father part of my identification? Would somebody look at my life and say, there is Jules, daughter of God? Not because I have it all together, not because I behave perfectly, but because there's something about the way that I live that tells you whose child I am. And then the question turns around. If my children are identified with me, if somebody says, that's Jules' son, what does my life attach to that statement? Legacy matters. Not because we can guarantee the choices of the next generation. We cannot. Every person has to respond to Jesus for themselves. Faith can't simply be inherited like your grandmother's rocking chair. But what we model matters. What we normalize matters. What we prioritize matters. And Exodus 20 gives us this striking contrast. It speaks of the consequences of sin reaching the third and fourth generation of those who reject God. But then God says He shows love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. 1,000 generations. Don't miss the scale of grace here, my friend. I don't read that passage as get everything right or your children are doomed. Absolutely not. But I read it and think the choices that I make today can become part of the spiritual inheritance I hand to the people who come after me. I cannot choose Christ for my children, but I can give them every opportunity to see what a life with Christ at the center looks like. And that changes the way I think about legacy. I don't primarily want to leave my children things. I want to leave them a direction. This is where we look. This is who we turn to when life gets messy. This is who leads. And then listen to what Numbers 1 says. The Israelites are to set up their tents by divisions, each of them in their own camp under their standard. In their own camp. And that one got me too. Because some of us spend an awful lot of time looking at everybody else's campsite. Why am I over here? Why are they over there? Their side looks better. They seem to have more shade. Their tent is bigger. Their children are doing better. Their career moved faster. Their marriage looks easier. They have a marriage. Their ministry is growing. Their bank account looks healthier. Their grass really looks greener on the other side of the tabernacle. And before you know it, Instead of living faithfully where God has positioned you, you are mentally camping in somebody else's life. Comparison pulls us out of position. Envy pulls us out of position. Constant dissatisfaction pulls us out of position. And then I thought of Paul. We can truly learn from what he says in Philippians 4. He says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. He says it twice. I've learned. Contentment was learned. Paul knew need. He knew plenty. He knew hunger. He knew abundance. His circumstances changed. His source didn't. His stability didn't come from getting the campsite he preferred. It came from Christ. So maybe you aren't where you thought you would be by now. Maybe this isn't the part of the wilderness you would have chosen. Maybe you would rather be camping on the north side. Don't confuse an uncomfortable position with an incorrect position. There are, of course, times when God calls us to move. Israel moved. But notice what happened when they did. Numbers 2 says that the tent of meeting traveled in the middle of the camps and that the people were to travel just as they camped. That's just such a beautiful picture. God wasn't only central when they were stationary. He remained central when they were moving. And perhaps this is where this chapter becomes particularly relevant to us. It's one thing to keep God at the center when life is quiet. Morning coffee, Bible open, worship music, everything lovely. But then life starts moving. The phone rings. Something goes wrong. Plans change. Someone says something. A crisis erupts. And then suddenly God is somewhere at the back of your day. But the formation wasn't supposed to disappear just because they were moving, and neither should ours. When life is settled, God at the center. When life is changing, God at the center. And wherever we are going, Jesus leads. That, for me, is where the military imagery in this chapter becomes so powerful. There are divisions, standards, leadership, position, unity. Israel moved almost like an army in formation. And although their battles would often be physical, you and I know from the New Testament that our deepest battle is spiritual. So I'm not saying Numbers 2 gives us a formula for spiritual warfare, but I do think there's wisdom in this picture. There is strength in a people who listen to God. There is strength in unity. There is strength in knowing where you are positioned and refusing to abandon your place simply because somebody else's looks more attractive. And above all, there is strength where the presence of God remains central. That standard mattered because it gave an army a rallying point. In the confusion of battle, you knew where to look. You knew where your people were. You knew where you belonged. And perhaps some of us need to raise the spiritual standard in our homes again. Not aggressively, not self-righteously, not by becoming the Bible police, but quietly and consistently saying, this is who we belong to. This is who leads us. This is where we return. Because perhaps the real question Numbers 2 leaves us with is this: who is organizing your life? Something gets the best of your attention. Something shapes your decisions. Something determines what moves first and what gets pushed to the side. Is it your career, your children, a relationship, money, fear, your reputation, your own comfort? Or is it God? And once you know what belongs in the center, the next question becomes simpler. Who goes first? My friend, we don't need to know the whole route through the wilderness. Israel didn't. We don't need to control where everybody else pitches their tent. Thank goodness. And we don't need to spend our lives staring across the camp wishing we had somebody else's position. We need to be faithful with the people, the place, and the responsibility God has entrusted to us. Carry your spiritual banner well. Love the people in your camp. Stay attentive to God's leading. And when it's time to move, move. But move with God, still at the center, and Jesus still out in front. This is Jules, and I'm for Jesus. And I can't wait for us to chat again soon.